Hi, and welcome to our second episode of the Hey Boss Roundtable discussions. We've got an interesting episode today. We're going to be speaking about inclusion and diversity in medicine. We'll start off introducing ourselves because we have a lot of the same faces as last time, but a couple of surprises. So my name's Kimberly Budgeon. I'm a registrar working in radiation oncology in Queensland.
I'm Dominique Lee. I'm a radiation oncologist working with these guys in Brisbane.
And hi, my name is Masaki, another radiation oncology registrar in Queensland.
And I'm Lynn McCormack. I'm a clinical psychologist and associate professor at the University of Newcastle.
I'm Dr. Chris Penny. I'm a staff specialist palliative medicine physician in Sydney.
Hi, I'm Associate Professor Nada Hamad. I'm a staff specialist haematologist in Sydney.
Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about inclusion. So belonging is a really important feature in medicine. Belonging is the experience of feeling accepted, included, and valued by others. A sense of belonging has a major influence in relationships and in general well-being. Today we'd like to talk about how the healthcare landscape is performing to promote respectful inclusion of doctors from a wide range of backgrounds, including gender, ethnicity, but also personalities, beliefs, goals, and values. Any opening remarks that anyone would like to make at this point?
We'll invite our guests to speak.
I could start very briefly by saying that, the concept of gender equity, diversity, and inclusion has really become a central topic in forums in medicine and outside of medicine, particularly given the recent social injustices we've witnessed on television from the US, amongst other countries. It's now something social media has facilitated in bringing to the forefront of our minds in society and culture. And I think, we talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, or EDI, more in the sense that it needs to be something deliberate in the workplace. But I think that ultimately in medicine, it has to take a slightly different shape. I call it intersectional medicine. I think it's more than just about the workplace. It's about patients. It's about the people we look after and what that really means. What EDI means for medicine is very different to what it means in other workplaces because it has an impact on patients and the people we look after in our community.
Thank you. I think that's really important. So we're starting off with a quote as well from Baumeister and Leary. In their research into the human need to belong, they cautioned that cultures use social inclusion to reward and exclusion to punish their members as a way of enforcing their values. We'd just like to invite our panelists. How do you think this statement relates to culture in medicine?
I think a big challenge in medicine really is that a lot of it's based on tradition, and a lot of our processes we have take pride in tradition. And a challenge that for diversity is that sometimes, for example, in settings for entry into medicine, with interviews or entry into the workforce, there are a lot of barriers to diversity in that tradition. Usually, for example, in physician training, which is what I went through, a lot of our physician training is where we have to conform to certain perceived standards of what's tradition and what a physician is. And sometimes we lose some of that. We lose something through that conformity in terms of representation from different backgrounds. That we're encouraged to conform to, what the majority is, and we lose something through that. I think, yeah. And so I think we have to make an effort if we really want diversity to build in structures, to change what has been traditionally doing as in physician training, for example.
Could I ask the doctors present could they reflect for a moment on that word culture? Because we tend these days when we're talking about culture to be talking about diverse cultures, i.e., regional backgrounds of people, But I think when I think about culture in medicine, I guess the first culture I think about is that hierarchical structure that has been traditionally there in medicine. And now we're layering it, aren't we, with other cultural interpretations. How do you feel, as people from diverse backgrounds, that the original culture, i.e., the hierarchical structure in which if you didn't do what you were told or didn't turn up or didn't put in the time, you were excluded or punished, or didn't get into programs, etc., etc. And how do you think that collides with the other more diverse cultural aspects that are now, part of medicine?
For me, I think a lot of what we think about when we talk about medical culture is that phrase medical fraternity, because it implies that you're a certain gender, you look a certain way, you behave a certain way. And those are really, really firmly held beliefs that the public hold, I think, about what a doctor looks like, and who gets to become a doctor often reflects that expectation. And it's not just getting into medicine. I think also it's the positions of power, it's the managerial positions, it's the people that we select to be directors of departments and who teach and mentor medical students and junior doctors. Because it's, Chris, you raise a good point that we need to be mindful of who we select into medical school and into colleges, but then it's every point along the way, medical colleges, and then who's, represented in terms of being a director of a unit, director of a hospital, and a face in government as well.
This is a multi...
A lot of people are scared about destabilizing this traditional infrastructure, and if we happen to consider alternative ways of doing things, then we lose everything. So in some ways, there's different parts. It's got to be a slow change. Something's going to be a slow change, but I think there are certain things that we could do differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a multi-layered issue, isn't it? I think from my observation, medical schools in general, they've done a lot better than the actual hospitals or specialties, because there is, at least in terms of gender equity and also ethnicity, I think there is some. When I went through the selection process, we used to joke about how there's an Asian quota. So like, like our medical school, for instance, like Chris, we used to say there's probably like at least 30% quota. So we couldn't have more than 30% or 20% of medical students were Asian. So it made, things for us really hard to get in. It's really a way of creating sort of sense of comfort for ourselves. But also like, I think there is something to be said in creating opportunities for the right people. And so the qualifications you bring or your achievements has to be measured relative to opportunities, right? Because I know tons of people who were given the right opportunities, but utilize that opportunity to different to different levels. And I think, at every level, we have to look at individuals for their potentials and their achievement or progress relative to their opportunities, as opposed to just achievements, and how good the CV looks. Because if you were given all the opportunities in the world, of course you're going to have better position on paper. And so there's so many things to be said here. But I think, it does make me wonder, like in medical school, I felt like there was a lot more recognition of sort of this issue of diversity and inclusion. And then once you, at least back in my days, once you enter the workforce, it's completely different ball games.
Yeah, I think it's bizarre in medicine that it's not recognised more. I know that, for example, in the corporate structure, there are incentives for corporations to have, like it's seen as an enhancement. It's good PR, at least, to have diversity representation in certain aspects. in any interview panel I've been on, or at least even on both sides, whether I've been on the interview panel myself or whether I'm interviewing for a role, they never really ask about your, what you might bring in terms of your background. Yeah, that's not, you're not from a medical perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a topic really, to the heart of Nada, so I can just see you itching to have your say.
So I think we're missing a big piece, and I reflect on this. I've been really reading quite a lot recently about all these issues. I mean, it's NIDOC week. We've, seen some of the atrocities in Canada. And reflecting on medicine, the history of medicine is something we don't talk about and we don't reflect on. Medicine was really born in a patriarchal environment, in a colonial environment, pretty much white, in a white supremacist sort of structure. And it is riddled with racism and sexism throughout its history. A lot of the modern work that we do is fundamentally based on those principles. Those people who developed medicine and evolved medicine really brought that into medicine, and it's still pervasive because the structure and its evolution were born in that space. There isn't room to consider alternative ways of thinking, alternative ways of including other people, respect for other cultures or other beliefs. And a lot of the problems we have in medicine, in the workforce, sure, granted, when you look at it from a modern perspective, we can intellectualize what it means to be inclusive. But in general, if you practice every day something that is inherently or structurally racist or sexist, that rubs off on everybody. So we're all perpetuating this concept of whatever it is that we're doing is the best way of doing it. And if the patient or if your colleagues don't fit into that structure, well, so be it. There's no other way. This is modern medicine. In order to really, unpack all of this, we really have to acknowledge and accept that the infrastructure itself is inherently biased. It's inherently racist and sexist, and ableist for that matter. For all of the equal opportunities laws and rules that we perceive to exist, they don't actually quite apply in medicine. I don't know anyone who will put their hand up and say, I know a colleague who's wheelchair bound and is a doctor. If it happens, it's a rarity and oddity, not because it's not possible, because of course it's possible. It's just not something we have really nurtured or allowed or reflected on or deliberately changed. So we have a problem in medicine where we can't actually look inwards. We can't acknowledge or accept our flaws. And that happens in research, that happens in the way we look after patients, it happens in the way we treat each other. I think that in order to talk about all of these things, we just have to take it in and sit in the discomfort that this is where medicine came from. There's a lot of problems with it. We need to go back and look at it objectively and think about how we restructure the systems to facilitate inclusion, diversity, and understanding of these issues in a more open way. And to do that takes a lot of work. And for all the committees that I'm on, all the EDI committees that I work on from colleges, from, NGOs, we're still in that superficial level of we need to be more inclusive. So we need to have representation. Representation is great. Don't get me wrong. It's great that look at this panel. It's very diverse. It's representative. That's fantastic. But the work needs to be deliberate. It needs to have academic rigor. It needs to actually be purposeful and truly authentic in its intent to actually change things. And I think that's what is lacking. And in Australia, we really haven't had that conversation culturally in society in general. We're quite in our infancy in the acknowledgement and acceptance of our racist history. And so it still feels a little bit tokenistic. And I'm hoping in time, the more we talk about this, the more likely we are to actually make inroads. But at the very beginning, we really have to think hard about why our social structures are the way they are and why it is the way it is in medicine, because we're quite behind, I think, even in the international community in medicine around these issues.
Yeah. Something that you've raised there reminds me that there's the layers extend into our research, even around medicine and health. And that I see because basically I'm a qualitative researcher. And if you're a qualitative researcher in science, there's a lot of, oh dear, maybe that's not the real research. That's not really what research is about. And you're not going to be able to generalize it, if I ever hear that word generalize anymore. But that whole idea that modern medicine is based very much supposedly on a quantitative or a nomothetic approach to understanding, and yet in practice it's probably least evidence-based scientific model out there. But there's this slow sort of also ponderous shift around critical psychiatry, critical psychology, where people are starting to say, hang on a minute, the medical model is very much, again, based very much in this biased, culturally bound, early colonial type white way of thinking, and that there is maybe a more collectivist way to look at medicine, where we look culturally inwards at how people respond differently across all sorts of cultures that might be just as equally robust in its way of treatment as a medical model that supposedly is based on a quantitative nomothetic style of evidence-based but really isn't. So I think that sort of there's a whole pile of mirrors here going on around the way medicine's practiced. And a lot of my research actually is about the critique of the medical model, and i.e. that whole idea that we should be looking more culturally at different ways in which people heal and get better.
I think one of the major challenges in medicine is that because our job is seen to be sort of, I don't know, being a doctor is a job where people do the right thing. There's a lot of people just expect doctors to do the right thing. And so if we look at the corporate sector or other professions, there are policies and guidelines on how things, how groups should be structured, or there's a lot of these things in medicine that you just kind of expect the people who are higher up to do the right thing. And of course, when you have a group of people and just expect them to do the right thing, they don't. And there's tons of people who abuse the system. And unfortunately, the decision makers to date have, this is the thing about unconscious bias, isn't it? You create, you don't move towards any positive changes that you don't view as a positive thing.
Yeah, it's hard to challenge your own
it's hard
thoughts,
it's hard to challenge your own thoughts unless there are actual policies or laws against, or to force you to think otherwise. And so these individuals, as a woman, starting out my career, we used to be told, we just have to, wait for these old fuddy-duddy professors to retire. But what actually happens in reality is that these individuals pick their successors to be, of exactly the same character. And then it just becomes a succession of one, and that's been the story in medicine. And that's why I think it's been so slow to change. And so, people who actually voice opinions like this, it has made no difference at all, because at the policymaker level, they just do what they want, and there's no laws against that.
Being a minority pioneer, it's hard work. You burn out.
It's hard work.
Yeah. But what a minority pioneer needs is allies, really. And need allies at the top. And, allies, it's hard to, become an ally. You have to have an incentive necessarily. But in order to become an ally, you kind of have to recognize your own privilege. Even as a minority, I'm a minority, I'm Polynesian. But even I have to recognize my own privilege, and once you recognize your own privilege, then you can help others that need it. Yeah.
I think I like how you articulated that, Chris, because the burden of being the only person of color or the only person who's a woman in a room or an alternative gender to the status quo is really quite crushing. You know, there are times when it excites you to be a representative. You want to represent your community. You want to be there to occupy that space, to be the change. But unfortunately, the higher you get in the hierarchy of medicine, or in any place really, and it's not unique to medicine, in life in general, the more difficult it is for people to see you in that position and to accept their role or their complicity in the problems you're talking about. Because it's quite confronting when you tell people that they have privilege, the automatic defense, mechanism starts, even if you don't say it openly, even if you subtly hint at it, or sometimes just your mere existence reminds people that they've been complicit in systemic racism, and they don't like that. Nobody wants to be told that they're part of a system that is not necessarily in their minds the kind of more representative of the morality they thought they had. And medicine is full of this kind of moral high ground. We're supposed to be people who want to do the right thing and help others, and we're here to care for other people. So it's very confronting when someone says your colleague was said something racist, but that person's my friend. That means by inference that I'm also a bad person. Or, your colleague made inappropriate sexual advances towards somebody else. Well, that can't be possible because that person's a good guy. They're a nice guy. They're like me. So, for the person who's making the point, either by existence or explicitly, it takes an extraordinary toll. It takes away the mental bandwidth they have and the energy they have to do their job, to pursue higher career goals, to pursue, anything that's joyful, because their whole world is consumed by this, need to either censor themselves or to protect themselves from other people, and to even looking for allies is hard, as you just mentioned, because who you think is an ally sometimes is an ally until there's a problem, and then they're no longer able or have the capacity to assist you. And that in its own right is very painful. And I'm speaking from experience. There's a lot of people that I thought were allies, but when it comes down to it, they don't have the capacity or the bravery to do it. And that's not a criticism. It's just, we're human beings.
Survive too, yeah.
Everyone has to survive the system. So, I find the concept of allyship very challenging, because sometimes allies are very eager to come out of the woodwork and say, we're allies. But when it comes down to the reality of it, they don't have the capacity or are not supported to be allies. And then everybody loses out.
And I think something that you said, Chris, aligns with that, Nada, about you're the first, you're the people that are pushing from the bottom, or you're the people who are pushing in a minority. You're a minority group, and in a way that takes time, that takes energy, and yet you're in a busy job. So where do you find the time to give over to this, to make sure that every little offence is recognised and picked up on? We talked about that last time, about how do people speak up when they recognise there's an inequity or there's an injustice. And for most people, it's just everybody's a little bit scared because you're on a pecking order, and also if you speak up, as you say, Nada, the allies that you thought you had might just fall away. And then again, you're busy. You're busy doctors. So
honestly, in reality, people don't speak up. The number. I experience micro and macro aggressions maybe every 1 or 2 minutes of every day, through the email chains, through the looks I get, through from every direction in life. That's just my life. And so what happens is minority groups just get accustomed to it. We just learn how to live with it. And that is a necessity of life, unfortunately. Speaking up is something I don't think I encourage others necessarily to do unless they have the fortitude to withstand what's to come. Because in reality, speaking up means usually an end of your career, or a lot of negative experiences that are likely going to lead to burnout. That's just this is
you got to do self-care as well. And I think if even though you might not be speaking up, I think the importance of representation, which is kind of what diversity is about. It's about representation. That might be superficial, as in like you might be there but not necessarily speaking up. It's still important, but the next step is inclusion, which is about being invited to participate, meaningful participation, and that's an invite from an ally, essentially, yeah, who might be in a strong position, yeah.
Yeah. For me, as Nada says, it's very hard to speak up. It's I think it takes a lot of courage, and for me, it's been an evolution, and it's really realizing that my human worth is not defined by my job, and other people's worth is not defined by their jobs. Then kind of thinking like that puts me on the same level to a degree, to some degree, enough for me to be able to speak up on issues. But as Chris pointed out, you can actively speak up, but you can sort of passively do things as well. And I think there's a lot of education that can be done to empower people on how they can actually do that. Because a lot of the times people don't know how to passively support people. And that is one way that can be really powerful. You don't have to speak up, but you can passively support each other. And so I think this is a really nice segue to the next question, but I'll let you say what you were going to say, Lynn.
I was simply going to say, Dominique, you've been very brave. You've spoken up. I know there must have been a lot of negatives around that, but I'm seeing loads of positives, including this that we're doing now, Hey Boss. What do you think are the growthful areas for you from speaking up, and how do you think that has been contaminated, or how has that been able to be transferred to others and give others courage?
So for me, speaking up has led to, I mean, we can talk about my experience another day, but for me, speaking up in very uncomfortable situations have all been very stressful and really uncomfortable. But I think it allowed me to realize that there are actually allies, even though they may be the minority. There's good people out there, and I think it kind of allowed me to kind of have my sort of what's the word? Allowed me to recognize the people who would either passively or actively support people who are doing the right things versus the people who actually don't care anything about them but themselves or the institution or what have you. And I think that's been a really valuable like human growth, because when you're in your younger sort of 20s or what have you, you think the whole world will be like your family. When I got into medicine, we went to med school camp, and I would have been second year at the time, and a third year guy came up on the podium and said, "Welcome to the family." Oh God, that felt really good. But when you enter the workforce, you realize you're not like that. I mean, it's not like that. And so, I think you try a few times and see that you can do it and take courage from it and keep moving forward. I do it because I have amazing people supporting me. So these are, people who are actively supporting this cause. And if you look around, there's people like that.